coding was already a requirement to the analysis of larger amounts of data. But now we don't need to learn to know how to code. With some small knowledge, you can produce some code that helps you a lot and speed up a lot of things. And speeding up uh, analysis and making questions and producing results, we allow you to allow us to make more profound questions, more deeper analysis, to accumulate more data, to produce more robust hypotheses. Instead of doing this amount of work now, I can do a much higher amount of work in the same time, and this also will increase some level of competitiveness for young people mainly, but I think it will change how we make questions and how we even with how we produce data.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 26 of The Polling Principle. I'm very excited today to have Professor Hugo Verli with me, an expert in molecular simulations, and we have a common friend at Polling. I think this would be a super interesting conversation. We haven't had, I think, anybody yet that comes from a traditional, or not traditional, from a standard computational chemistry. I think everybody so far was coming from the ML side of the world, but not from like the, I guess, molecular dynamics or computational chemistry as it existed before. I guess AlphaFold.
The responsibility.
Yes. Well, no, I mean, I think it will be a casual conversation, but I'm sure a lot of people will be very excited to learn a little bit more about this. So, to begin with, I'd love to learn a little bit about your background and maybe what are the things that led you to work in molecular simulations, and then maybe some of the projects that you've been working on. I have a whole bunch of questions also about like your work on tropical diseases and so on. So we'll get into all that stuff. But maybe to begin with, a little bit about yourself, please.
Okay. Well, I'm a pharmacist from formation. I had a master's degree in organic chemistry and a PhD in molecular and cell biology. But I always worked with molecular modeling and different approaches. I started working with small molecules, more organic molecules, and moved to protein simulations. In the beginning, we just executed simulations with segments of a protein, like you cut the sphere surrounding the binding site, and we moved to realistic models. I'm a full professor at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul for 20 years, now teaching for 20 years. And now I moved to another research institute in Brazil that's called Brazilian Biosciences National Laboratories. It's one of the largest laboratories in the field in Latin America. I have, I think, most of my substantial part of my scientific contribution was on carbohydrates, glycoconjugates, and protein carbohydrate interactions, but also something on proteins, some drug discovery, and I think a mixed set of techniques.
Maybe to start at a high level, why is it possible or insightful to do simulations of molecules? Meaning, compared with other fields, right? So in some fields, in engineering, for example, we can simulate the load of materials in a building, and then we can use that to prevent the building from falling. But in economics, for example, it's very hard to simulate the behavior of people, right? You could create a simulation for how people would behave based on some potential new regulation, but that wouldn't necessarily be useful, right? It's just too complicated. So how do things work, I guess, in molecular simulations? Can we actually learn something from a simulation that then we apply in the real world?
Yeah, I will answer that with, I think, two different approaches. One is that molecular simulations, the first simulations of biomolecules came from the 70s. And since then, molecular dynamics mainly, but other simulation techniques are likely the only technique able to represent simultaneously the two-dimensional structure, the atomistic level, and the temporal dependence on the atomistic level. So you simulate how the protein behaves during time, and this opens a multitude of additional things you can access. So first, you have like a crystal structure that is static, and you can infer some flexibility, but you can take it as a structure and you add flexibility to it, and you see how it should behave in solution. But you can add a lot of stuff that are pretty difficult to include from the experimental perspective. Difficult you can sometimes include, but it could be more challenging. For example, you crystallize a transmembrane protein. The membrane is not present in the crystal structure, so we can add the membrane. And you can do more than that. You can change the composition of the membrane. You can mimic a lipid raft. You can mimic different an asymmetric membrane and see how this influence on the protein behavior. You have the crystal structure of ion channel. You can model the passage of the ion through the channel. You have the crystal structure of a protein that has post-translational modifications as glycosylations. And glycosylation rarely appears on experimental structure. So you can add the glycosylation and see how the glycosylation interferes on the protein dynamics. And we can move in the direction of drug discovery with simulations being able to accurately reproduce the thermodynamics of drug receptor interactions. So you add a lot of stuff that can some moments are not accessible through experiments, and another moments they are accessible, but they are more expensive. They require more time, a longer experimental setup. So I think it's faster and easier to obtain some of this information as well from molecular simulations.
Yeah, and maybe doubling down a little bit of that. I think this is one of the areas that is, well, at least it was most interesting to me when I started to learn a little bit about this space. Right, like the in other fields is maybe easier to set up experiments and test things, right? Like in the world of computer science, if you want to know how a system would behave, you change its rules. You just change the rules around the system and then evaluate, right? Because you can touch things, so to speak, at the most minute level. Whereas in life sciences, it may be very hard to go and say, well, I want to change something in a protein and then see what happens later, right? So I guess that is the main reason why people do molecular simulations, right? To be able to do things that experimentally would be very, very hard to do, or would cost more, or would take much longer.
Yeah, sometimes they are even not accessible. There's a post-translation modification on one interesting example. Then I think more than 95% of the proteins deposited on the protein data bank are obtained in E. coli. And E. coli don't add glycosylation or other types of post-translation modification. So you can include layers of information, the influence of pH, concentrations. But as you mentioned, this is important to be recorded. It's challenging to define your system, to include what must be included, to prepare a setup that represents your system. And this, I think, is one of the moments in which we arrive at the moment when you have computational power and software capability to offer robust representations of biological situations, not only simplify the theoretical models.
Mhm. So actually, I'm really touched on that. Like, what are the limitations of molecular simulation to match, I guess, experiment? Is it just the amount of compute? And then if we have enough compute, we can build simulations that are as good as we need to? Or is there something else? Do we need new science, or do we need new techniques that we don't have yet?
Yeah, I like this perspective. We must be pretty aware about the limitations as much as we are from the potentialities of the technique. Um, I would resuming perhaps two. One of them is the level of simplification of the physics behind the model, so the force fields. Um, your question will be as good as the force field capability to answer them. And we have severe limitations of the force field, like we don't mimic electronic effects. Metal ions are usually difficult. Parameterization of some compounds. We have a lot of limitations on this field. But for the conventional stuff, we are very good to go. And another aspect is, as you mentioned, the how good we can sample the conformation space of the system. And this is usually considered as a longer simulation that require more computational power. This changed somewhat when GPUs became the state of the art to simulate things. So we circumvented a little bit the need for extremely large computation infrastructure. But I understand that in the recent literature, the past years, uh, we are changing progressively our understanding that longer simulations are better, to more simulations are better, and that we will never be able to sample all conformational states in extremely long simulations, and we need necessarily multiple simulations. And there are several examples of researchers doing shorter simulations but in larger quantities, and these offer very robust sampling of what should occur in solution. It's like to think as an ensemble, as an average instead of a series of instantaneous positions. And I think we are closing the gap to properly represent native conditions pretty fast on this aspect of computational power and of the sampling.
Let me draw similarities. So one of the things that um, I think was it Richard Saturn, one of the big machine learning researchers, called the better truth. I think it was in a paper, was that in machine learning, what makes the difference is more data, right? If you have more data, you can build better systems. And back in the 90s or the 2000s, when maybe most people didn't have data, we developed very complex techniques, for example, for image recognition. And then came the machine learning folks, built neural networks from a lot of data, but were conceptually very, very simple. And then they were able to get much better results, right? So at the end of the day, what mattered was not being very smart with your techniques. It was just getting more data, right? So is it the same here? If we had 10x the compute capacity, we could just solve a lot of problems that we just can't do today, right? With the techniques that we have.
Um, I'm sorry. The point is, that if we were be able to solve the problems with larger computers,
Yeah. If we have more capability, if we have much more ability to generate more simulations, to generate more data, would that be enough?
yeah, certainly it would improve our ability to solve problems. That is a certainty. But I'm not sure this will be enough. Like we have Anthem, for instance, that's able to simulate quickly multiple microseconds for systems. And um, I think we need to understand some additional aspects on proteins, some limitations of the force fields that will appear only on longer simulations, and even how to treat the uncertainty derived from the simulation. So um, for example, this idea to repeat simulations is not consensual on the community. I have several discussions about that with colleagues, and the idea that the molecular dynamics is deterministic. But at the same moment, it's a chaotic system, so it will change a lot depending, and perhaps change exponentially depending on how coordinates on the beginning change or some condition. So I don't know if we will be able to solve every question regarding protein dynamics with more computational power. The results indicating that in some systems, polarizable force fields make a lot of difference. Or with different types of water molecules that change the thermodynamics of interaction. So I think we have still some theoretical questions Like we use a physical model from the 70s, and you haven't changed it mainly. It's the same. So I think our ability to solve problems will depend on these limitations, and we need to review some of these tools, perhaps with the new machine learning force fields derived from QM data. Don't know. Um,
Yeah. Um, and then maybe to do a little bit of a, I guess, step back and an introduction for people that may be listening to this who are not computational chemistry aficionados, I guess. You, I guess, what you mean is that for a lot of the simulations we use molecular dynamics, right? Which is I'll try to explain it in simple words, right? It's a technique in which you ignore the electrons in the molecule, so that you basically just look at the atoms and then assume that those atoms behave a little bit in a classical way. They attract and repel each other, and they have bonds between them that are more or less rigid. And then you simulate the movement of those atoms, but you ignore a lot of all basically of the quantum chemistry, right? So even with a very crude, so to speak, technique, you can get interesting results, right? But of course, if you had more compute, you could use richer, more techniques, including more of the information that we know about those molecules. But in spite of that, we're like, these molecular dynamic simulations are still very, very useful to solve problems, sure, to model real world behavior. Right? Sure, I get that right.
sure, and we like the most of the conditions in solution are pretty well reproduced by this classical physics. Um, the situation changes in some scenarios, like you need to simulate the coordination with an ion. Uh, you have a p-stack interaction in your system. Um, and the polarizability is a major issue in some moment, but these are specific situations. For the general situations, I think molecular dynamics with the simplistic physics was able to help us to elucidate and to understand nature in a much deeper way.
Mhm. Um,
And they are very accurate in much of the situations.
yes, yes, of course. Um, um, I have a lot of questions, different ways that I would like to go to, but let me, go one more technical question before we go into something a little bit more high level about applications and so on. Um, how far or how big do you think the simulations can scale? Right, like right now, as you say, we are very good at simulating proteins in solution, for example, binding to substrates or things. Would we be able to simulate really large complexes, organelles, entire cells, entire organisms? Like how far would these tools scale up in the future?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question. I recently saw a person posting a paper in LinkedIn with a very large system. I think some million atoms, tens of millions of atoms, and some a senior researcher comment below. This doesn't mean anything because the simulation is too short, so it don't represent anything. I don't follow this interpretation. We have now simulations with hundreds of millions of atoms. I think this is the record. And I think this is important to show the frontier of the field. Like we are moving towards representing entire organelles, small cells, the crowded environment of the cytoplasm, the cytoplasm, and certainly these aspects will help us understand a lot of things about biological systems, trafficking of vesicles in cytoplasm, dynamics of cytoskeleton and vesicle, and cell recognition. I think there are a lot of questions that we are not doing now that will benefit from the ability to make this kind of simulations. Uh, but simultaneously, we when we look to isolated protein solutions, we can use the same level of computation infrastructure to represent this protein in a level very close to experimental conditions. So we can both at the macro level and on the micro level as well. And perhaps I think in the near future, we won't need to do NMR as well unless for specific situations. We will have a very solid and commonly recognized tool that substitute such type of experiments to see signal transduction, confirmation induction, like why I need to do a circular dichroism if the simulation represents solidly a protein. So I think these two scenarios are interesting.
It's fascinating. Would we? I mean, I think I know what you're going to answer, but I'll ask anyway. Like, would we get to a point where we just don't need to do experiments anymore because the silicon methods are that good that they give us results that apply directly, or will we always need that experimental validation?
Yeah. Um, I would be conservative on this answer. I like AlphaFold didn't replace it, structural biology methods and won't replace it. I even think that the community was too eager to state that it solved the structural biology problem. It didn't solve it. It helped a lot, but didn't solve it. So we still need X-ray crystallography, we still need NMR. Cryo-EM is playing a major role in understanding biological systems. But I think that a lot of stuff will be able to be replaced by molecular simulations. Some stuff is replaced and expanded. I think we'll be able to do simulations more routinely and automatically and gain access to some information that otherwise you won't be able to do. And in some levels, eliminate the need to do a more expensive experiment. But I think we will still need several of these experimental tools to train models, to validate some specific situations. But the need for this experiment, I think, will be reduced in the near futures. Progressively, we will need less experimentation to do some of this, to obtain some of this data.
Yes. Um, which of course will be beneficial because experiments are expensive.
Yes.
No matter how we do them. Maybe let's switch a little bit topics before talking about AlphaFold and machine learning and so on. What kind of um, what kind of things do we learn from molecular dynamic simulations or other simulations that are useful for drug discovery, for example, or what other things would we use these simulations for beyond just trying to understand what is happening in a cell?
Yeah, that's important. We move from basic science to some applied stuff. Um, well, from the start, like I would take the inhibitors of HIV protease as likely one of the first examples on how these techniques came to the market, to say. From the start, they help to understand the main interactions behind the structure-activity relationship for a series of compounds, and to help design new derivatives. Um, we moved progressively to use it for screening compounds. But this ability to screen compounds, I think it is still limited in its accuracy. We are just arriving to techniques with around like 80 or more, 85% of correlation with experimental data. So this changes a lot what we can do with these techniques. We are just recently obtaining methods to screen billions of compounds. So we can screen a huge chemical diversity and increase the chance of finding new, I think mainly for new scaffolds, originate scaffolds to new chemical patterns to interact with proteins, to modulate proteins. And from another aspect, specifically on simulations, um, for some decades, we recognize mainly free energy perturbation technique as the more accurate free energy tool. But it was known to be tricky to use, difficult to implement technically, prone to depend on subjective decisions, and with recent developments, I won't mention the commercial tools, but recent developments of some tools, we arrived to extremely accurate procedures, reproducible, solid, um, and I think this became routine in multiple drug discovery pipelines to improve series of compounds. I don't imagine drug discovery nowadays without chemical computational tools. I personally enjoy one additional layer of chemical computational tools to drug discovery that usually is not remembered by medicinal chemists. That is the simulation of the thermodynamics of interaction, not only free energy but also the association and dissociation constants and the estimation of the half-life of binding. And we usually consider the drug development only based on the affinity, but not on the half-life of binding. And these two properties are not related. So we are starting to have methods available to the community that can predict the half-life of binding. And I think this will change a lot the rate of success in some drug discovery pipelines.
Definitely. Yeah, I think this is one of the aspects that is very hard to understand for somebody that has never studied pharmacology, right? But like the half-life of a drug makes a big difference in like whether you need to take something 3 times a day or once a day or once a month, right? I think there was this amazing story about a new, now that you mention it, a new HIV molecule that you take by injection twice a year, and then apparently, it's 100% effective for preventing infection. And I was like, I guess from a perspective of a pharmacy person, is absolutely amazing, right? That a molecule will just stay in your body acting for 6 months.
Yeah, that's impressive, really impressive. And I think we are moving to be able to design this stuff, rationally design, not only to screen for uh, possible mechanisms, but we can design this stuff rationally to improve compounds. Some very interesting developments are in the near future.
Nice. So, what are maybe some of the indications or some of the diseases that you are interested in? Like maybe some areas where you have developed simulations, or that you would be interested in working on.
Um, I mm, I I'm drifting a little bit to some of my research lines, but I've been working with protein carbohydrate interactions and protein polysaccharide interactions, and these interactions are interesting for different aspects. They are usually of low affinity, and they are very difficult to predict. And we have like only two docking programs that were minimally validated for carbohydrates. I say minimally validated because they use like some tens of complexes to make their analysis. While for drug discovery, docking programs, focused programs, you have like thousands of complex under study. And to reproduce the affinity of this complex is also very challenging. So we are dealing with these situations, trying to establish techniques to better predict these affinities. um, we have some curiosities about some carbohydrates aspects. One that we are studying is the conformation of the ring. And in some situations, these conformations are distorted in databases. And some very elegant papers. A researcher from I think Barcelona, Carmen Ovira, has demonstrated the role of these conformations in catalysis. But not all proteins on PDB are enzymes. So what are these sort of conformations doing in other places? Are these just artifacts, or are they important to carbohydrate protein interactions? This may imply in the design of carbomimetic compounds. Now I'm moving more, try to understand larger molecular systems as the immune synapse. It's how the antigen presenting cell interacts with the T cells, and how the protein elements connecting the two cells are involved with the role of post-translational modifications, how the antigen conformation signal is transmitted to the cytoplasm of the cell. So I'm moving toward this direction.
Um, so maybe let me see if I can uh, translate that into simpler terms for folks that don't know that much about that. So if I remember right, a lot of this protein carbohydrate interactions appear in viruses, for example, right? Like
Mhm.
copies of the virus have these glycans attached to them, and this is important. For example, say in the case of I don't remember if SARS-CoV-2 is one of those things, right? But like if you want to create an antibody, for example, for that virus, you cannot just take into consideration the protein, right? Like, maybe the glycan is attached to it, so the antibody needs to somehow bind to the entire structure, right? Is that correct?
Yes, but it goes much further. We still the biochemistry textbooks or pharmacology, they still consider most biochemistry. You still consider carbohydrates as mostly structural or energetic molecules. And when we mention glycosylation, a lot of people use commonly the word decorations of the protein. But you have a multitude of phenomena that depends on carbohydrates. Inflammation is highly depending on glycosylated structure. Cell-cell migration depends on glycosylated proteins. Cell differentiation, cell recognition, tissue development. There are a lot of cancers that you correlate with expression of enzymes participate in different moments of carbohydrate metabolism. So, but you could modulate inflammation, you could modulate cancer, cell differentiation, hemostasis. Carbohydrate chemistry can interfere in a lot of stuff. People don't do much carbohydrate chemistry or exploration with this meaning, because one of the reasons because it's very difficult to synthesize carbohydrates, to synthesize carbohydrate derivatives. So it's much easier to go to conventional organic chemistry and expect they will mimic carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are very highly soluble in water, which creates other types of difficulties to synthesize compounds. So we can explore that. And from the biotechnological perspective, we can explore like degradation of biomass to produce renewable stuff, renewable plastic or paper industry or cotton industry. All of these in some moment includes enzyme degrading carbohydrates, and this could be optimized for different process. In Brazil, we use a lot of ethanol as fuel alternated to gasoline, so we can produce more ethanol depending on how you degrade the biomass. You have both biotechnological and health applications.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, I guess it's always I mean, I don't know, for some people it's easier to fall into the health applications where what kind of diseases we can cure. But of course there's this whole dimension of, can we create organisms that have, useful tasks, for example, right? Or can we, create enzymes that help, degrade plastics or whatever, right? And which is of course, very, very important, economically, right? And for the environment. So what kind of have you done any work within those maybe more industrial applications as well? What kinds of problems are interesting there?
Yeah, we were moving to study proteins that degrade starch and cellulose. Um, but I recently moved to an institute of research on bioscience. So what I was doing related to bioenergy, I'm progressively changing to bioscience. But we are finishing some studies with carbohydrate degrading enzymes that could be explored to produce better biomass, to better produce biomass from
Cool.
cellulose.
Okay. Which is used for fuel, I guess.
Yes,
So
in Brazil, the perspective mainly is fuel, but also on plastic, on, as I mentioned, to paper industry, you can use that to treat the paper, to treat the cotton tissue. There are other applications.
cool. Actually, now that you mentioned, we haven't mentioned of this, but you, in addition to research, you also teach, if I remember right.
Yes, I'm a teacher for 20 years.
Very nice. Have you seen maybe a shift. People becoming more interested in this type of topics, or less interested over time. I feel like, of course, there's a little bit of an ebb and flow, but maybe the kind of things go in phases, right? And maybe in the early 2000s, for example, technology was all the rage. Now it's kind of trending down a little bit. Are people or students, I guess, getting more interested in biology or drug discovery, right? From your perspective.
Um, I certainly realize that the students understand much better this field uh, in the undergrad level. I receive students that have more that are more easy to understand how the methods work and how it can be used. I Through the years, I needed to increase the depth of my teaching continuously. So the students came with more easiness to understand these methods. Um, they still have some blocks. They think that it's too difficult. They think that it's too complex. They prefer to go to like molecular biology. At the end, they return to use docking programs. They return to use simulation, but they don't like to become specialists on the field. But I think it's becoming more popular. I think it's uh, in part of that because some of the tools are becoming more easy to use. They are less requiring in the physics background, and they are more accommodating to people that don't come from physics or physical chemistry backgrounds. And I have colleagues that don't like it, and I know some developers of major packages believe that the package should be difficult to create a barrier for adventurers. I don't follow this thought. I think that we should accommodate different views of the tools, different ways to use it. So a student from a biology background, even without physical chemistry, will understand the target problem differently from a guy that came from chemistry or from physics. So I like the idea to combine different formations to make a more transversal understanding of the field. Um, so yes, I believe that more people are becoming interested because these tools are becoming more accessible. Um, but people still have some barriers to follow the field.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think I'm clearly biased in that aspect, right? Like, we at Bowling are building tools that try to make it even easier, right? To use molecular simulation. So I think that is clearly a positive thing, and it makes no sense to try to make things harder, by design. But yeah, maybe I'm biased, so maybe not the best person to give an opinion on that. And have you seen the type of understanding of the type of techniques that people need to have change over time? So like in many areas, for example, and people used to do statistical data analysis or whatever, and then now kind of like everybody needs to know how to write a little bit of code, which has become much easier, of course, right? Maybe people need to, or like students need to, uh don't need as much physics, but they need a more ability to perform statistical analysis or computation or whatnot. How have those things maybe changed over the past 20 years?
Um, it changed a lot when you look in like 20 years. Um, for instance, uh, free package to simulate biological systems are relatively new. I think 10 years or a little bit more than that, 15 years, they start to become more popular. Before that, we were more focused on paid package that required very expensive computation infrastructure. So it was a combination of free software running on personal computers that helped a lot people to do more simulation. And in the recent years, with this huge advancement of computational power following GPUs, like I can do molecular dynamic simulations during an undergrad class. I can ask for a student to run a simulation from a week to the other, and he will bring me like a 1 nanosecond simulation, and he will be able to make sense of that data instead of extremely short simulations that don't make much sense. He will be able to understand the effect of pH, of some preparation of the system, like when we see the protein denaturate, with the process passing through the denaturation or not. So it became much easier to teach molecular dynamics so students can see and they can connect with the field. And I think mm, we have most of the simulation package became free to access. We have some very interesting solutions that are not free, and they limit the use, but they offer severe advantage in some situations. Some easiness of use, the technical support is fantastic. So the let's say some of these accessible packages, they came with problems as well, with challenges too. The learning curve is much more complex.
Yeah. What what tools would you wish somebody just wrote and released them for free, or that would be useful? I know on the machine learning world, for example, like AlphaFold 2 was released as open source. A lot of other people build similar models, and now you have your Bolts and Chai and so on and so forth. A lot of those are open source as well. And I mean, I'm familiar with a few of the molecular dynamics tools and docking tools. Many of those are open source. What other things you would like to have as open source or free? Like what is I guess the open source computational chemistry world missing?
Good point. Um, when I worked with a package, a commercial package, during my master's degree. I think at the time it was called Insight 2. And I loved the package. It offered at the time. Later, the company I think became called Molecular Simulations, and later the software became was not distributed anymore. But it had a transversal perspective of the tools. So if I prepared the system for docking, it's the same preparation I use for a molecular dynamics. It will be say the same preparation I use to evaluate the volume of a binding site. Um, so it facilitated a lot the preparation of systems. A lot of colleagues still use parts of commercial packages that are free to prepare systems for some situations because these tools are extremely good. So I think the preparation of systems it's a challenge. I was the past weeks dedicate a lot of time to prepare some systems with different topologies, with unusual residues, and things don't work. Or you must have another package to install. Now I need another paid program to do that. I need to buy sometimes several programs to run some of the system preparation. So a transversal perspective of the field that helps you to prepare the system to make it available to do most of the types of calculations you do for docking, and other approaches for free energy predictions. And
So this is, of course, super interesting for me as well, right? As somebody that is building tooling, and the reason or kind of the background where I'm going with this question is, of course, one of the most significant things that has happened within the world of software engineering over the past couple of years is that now we have language models that are very, very good at writing code. And I think anybody that is, any software engineer that is honest to themselves would understand that LLMs have become really, really good. And then the job of a software engineer is going to change drastically. Right. And before, we would write all the code, we would spend lots and lots of time understanding things and so on. And now, knowing how to write good code has become much less important, and knowing how to prompt the language model to write good code is maybe a key skill, and it's going to become even more important over time. So there has been a very dramatic shift in what a professional software engineer does every day. But a benefit of it is that it becomes much easier to write code, right? So I wonder if, maybe people that come from the physics or the chemistry or biology background will decide, well, let's just write new tools that do the things that we need, right? Like maybe that, that will uh, trigger an explosion on, more better tools, better made, right? And hopefully will kind of enable more, scientific discovery and so on.
Yeah, I think it's very likely. But for I still think that most of the students, the new generation, is not prepared to use these language models at its peak performance. Let's say we had a formal preparation to make some kinds of questions. We had time to mature how to make some scientific questions, and from experience, I see that students had difficulties to organize the prompts, to organize the logic, to obtain the better answer from the tool. I used it to make to deliver some works for students, and I stated, please use a language model, and a single statement will perform your code, and they never get right on the same try. So, how to organize your thoughts, to organize the logic behind your question? I think this is a training the students will need to do, perhaps more than we had to do.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, the model cannot predict what you're thinking, right? You still have to put thought onto text. How do you think the work of a computational chemist or a biologist or maybe a scientist in general will change over the years as kind of language models keep getting better?
Yeah. From my experience, it speed ups everything. It's much faster to find a paper, specific paper that you remember being having read it sometime, but you don't found the paper. It speed up data analysis. Sometimes in an afternoon, at the afternoon, I think, well, I just finished a master degree in an afternoon with some coding using a language model to help the analysis. It would become mandatory. And uh, 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 Coding was already a requirement to the analysis of larger amounts of data, but now we don't need to learn to know how to code. With some small knowledge, you can produce some code that helps you a lot and speed up a lot of things. And speeding up uh, analysis and making questions and producing results, we allow you to allow us to make more profound questions, more deeper analysis, to accumulate more data, to produce more robust hypotheses. Instead of doing this amount of work now, I can do a much higher amount of work in the same time, and this also will increase some level of competitiveness for young people mainly, but I think it will change how we make questions and how we even with how we produce data. For now, LLMs still don't handle the most of these programs, but I think it's a matter of time. They will perform our simulation, will make the analysis, so we'll have the best part, that it's make the question and analyze the data. I think it's the more delicious part of being a scientist.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, and I have to say, I don't know what the answer of this question would be, but in the software engineering world, it's been very curious that there are more people writing code because it's easier, but there's going to be less software engineers because of the competition, right? Like so many people jumped into software engineering because there were very good salaries. It was very easy to find jobs, and all that basically disappeared overnight. So there are going to be less and less professional software engineers, but more, I guess, amateur software engineers. So I actually, I have no idea whether we will have maybe less professional scientists that are 10 times more efficient than they have today, but we will just have more or less scientists. I don't know, like I have no idea how that will turn out.
Yeah. The depth of this revolution is unpredictable. I have a friend that teaches in computational science, and even before the LLMs, he used to say to me that computational science will finish to exist as we know it, because the students already arrive at the university knowing how to code at some level. And now this improved substantially. So perhaps some fields will become more specific, more for high level applications than nowadays. But unfortunately, a lot of jobs will be lost in this process. They're already being lost.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, so, maybe kind of switching from that to a more positive note, like what are maybe some of the things, some of the new tools or techniques or, developments in the field that you're excited about? I think you touch on, machine learned force fields, for example. Of course, now we have more computers, right? So what other things that you're excited about that, may come up over the next few years that will have an impact in the field?
Yeah. In my field, one point is definitely this machine learning derived force fields. There are some. Um, I think the development is being pretty fast, um, and we already have some demonstration about their potential at mimicking the quantum level. Another field that I think it's more challenging to take more time to solidify, but it's marvelous, is generative molecular dynamics. You'll be able to produce an ensemble without the temporal trajectory. And to obtain an ensemble property in the absence of the physics, of the conventional physics. Um, I think this is a very rich perspective, but we take some time before we validate everything and show that it is solid. But some tools already exist, and for small global proteins, they seem pretty interesting. Even I will add a third layer. These tools, like boats, when you submit just the amino acid sequence, the SMILE representation of your compound, and you have not only the complex, but the affinity. The affinity is not there, but the complexes are very good. The results are, are showing to be very, very nice. I would say better than some old docking programs. So this is a very interesting moment where we start to to produce data without the conventional understanding of the systems. So I don't need the three-dimensional coordinates. I don't need to know the binding site. I don't need to know the chemical structure of the ligand, the three-dimensional structure. And even so, I obtain solid models. That is fantastic. And I think it could be more revolutionary than AlphaFold itself.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a super interesting point in what you said, which is that the models don't really understand the physics at a basic level, right? Which, we saw, for example, 2, 3 years ago, it was a little bit more obvious, right? Um, Not more obvious, but like, people would use it as a critique of language models, which was, they don't really understand, like mathematics, for example, right? Like, so if you feed two numbers, right, to a person knows that they need to run an algorithm to add those two numbers, whereas the language model just understands language, right? So it's just moving tokens left and right. So it would get every single mathematical operation wrong, right? Because it doesn't have that deeper layer of understanding of what is actually happening, right? But as you said, AlphaFold doesn't have a physics level understanding of what is happening, right? It just knows how to pattern, how to match, different patterns. Now, and as it happens, that um, that way of behaving is incredibly useful and incredibly powerful, right? Even if the understanding is missing. So, but I mean, I wonder, like, how would you think about it from a scientist perspective? You do want to understand what is happening. You want to understand. You want to make sure that there is something that you can trace, to kind of fundamental principles, right? So, like, how do you feel about this, basically black box models that may be really, really, really good, but there's no underlying, basis of understanding on reality.
Yeah, I think we tend to be conservative about how we perceive what is needed to produce a scientific model. For example, we use coarse graining for decades. and it's a fusion of atoms to make pseudo particles that don't exist, and it works pretty well. Um, Atoms are not rigid spheres. They have electrons. A chemical bond is not a spring, but is described as a spring on these models. Even when we go to quantum mechanics is not a single tool. We have multiple levels of simplifications, and depending on the level, have better or worse results. And you don't have a specific rule on how to choose the better simplification. It depends on your application. So I think that perhaps we are too used to these simple levels, these simple descriptions of how the world works based on Newtonian physics. And perhaps we don't need that for all the stuff we think we need. Perhaps we can simplify stuff. I think this week or past week, a paper on, I don't remember if it was on Science or Nature, was discussing if we already arrived to general intelligence with the current models. And it's a pretty interesting discussion. So at which level the model is able to produce a solid result is just, they said, like a parrot repeating stuff. And AlphaFold, as you mentioned, was a strong evidence that perhaps we don't need all this physics. And I think that for some application we will still need it, but for some perhaps we'll be able to get free from this almost 60 years understanding of or description of biomolecules and move to other ways to describe it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating, right? Like that we will reach, or we will achieve new models of describing reality that would never have happened to humans, right? Because we just don't think that way. Or if we will fall into this kind of trap of, tools that are just too complicated for most people to understand, that may be very good, very practical, right? But at some point, we just lose that ability to really describe what is happening, right? Which I don't know, it's a little bit scary.
Yeah, but for example, even from its origin, one of the main points in molecular dynamic simulations is to making analysis on averages. And we that original perception of about short time scales showing a clear evolution uh, changes a lot when you go to like multi-microsecond simulations. When you don't see that clear path anymore, you see transitions. So if you don't analyze that as distribution of properties, it became much more difficult to understand what is occurring. So if we can obtain these distributions without the temporal trajectory, I'm not sure this will be a major problem. Perhaps we get, and some people are going this direction, showing that we can have better reproduction of some ensemble data, some solution data, than if you focus so much on the temporal evolution of the property. If you change a little bit your coordinates, the temporal evolution will be different. So, to which temporal trajectory are we talking about? The first, the second, the third? Are you talking about a rare event or a slow event? If you go to an ensemble perspective, how we deal with these questions change a lot. But I think it's closer to the experiment.
Mhm. Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, of course, right. And I think this was also like one of the main criticisms of the current set of models, right? That they are static in nature, right? Like you get only one aspect, right? Instead of like being able to understand the dynamics of a protein, right? Which is, I guess, for most things essential, right? Like, you needed to find, cryptic pockets, so you need to understand the function of the protein, right? Not just, how it interacts with something at a specific point in time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Our understanding of these models will change a lot, and but we need to show that it behaves well or not, if the results are accurate or not. And now I think we are in this moment to check if it works.
Yep, yeah. No, I mean it's a super exciting point in time, right? Where a lot of this has just become much easier, right? So
Yeah.
hopefully we'll unlock a lot more new science and drug discovery. Um, with that, we're already at the hour mark. Was there anything else that maybe we didn't mention yet, but you think would be interesting? Maybe if somebody wanted to start learning more about this, where would you tell them to start?
Yeah, I would say I like to tell one thing to students. Uh, we are in the moment where we have the larger amount of information readily accessible, so you can make questions. If you make the proper question to a generative AI, you have probably a good direction. Uh, but I would advise students to be careful about tutorials. Tutorials are extremely simplified in most situation setups, and I see a lot of papers with people running simulations based on tutorial setups, and people don't prepare properly their systems. And I would say that a substantial amount of the results uses simulations in literature artifacts. Artifacts because of how the system was prepared, how the system was executed. So be careful about the state of the art of the field. I don't think running simple simulations just to add some paragraph on the paper adds science. So to be aware about the current state of the art, some journals on the field are publishing recommendations. So be aware about these recommendations and use the available tools.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Verli. It was super interesting chat. I hope you found it exciting as well. And thanks again for taking the time. It was my pleasure to have you here on the podcast.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.